Okay, the poem that I'm using for this commentary is a poem called Rising Five by Norman Nicholson from a collection called The Pot Geranium. This is actually an old IB exam that I was a reader for a couple of years ago, and I chose it because I think it's challenging enough that it's an interesting poem. It's not by Blake, but at the same time I think this is more about the process than the actual content. You might want to, if you're watching this video, you might want to do a Google search for the poem Rising Five so you can have a better copy of the poem in front of you. And the nice thing about doing this online is you can pause this video and come back when you have a copy of the poem. I've tried to set this up so you can read along with me, but I understand you might want to have a copy in hand to kind of follow the process here. The first thing I'm going to do when I open the poem, after I take a deep breath and say, okay, it's all on one page, it's manageable, it's written in English, I've got some advantages here. The first thing I'm going to do is just do an initial read through of the poem. I'm not going to read the guiding questions yet. That would be one way to approach them. And in fact, what I'm going to do with these guiding questions is to cover them up because I want to kind of start out with my own original thinking about this poem. Here's a read through of the poem. Rising Five. I'm rising 5, he said, not 4, and little coils of hair unclicked themselves upon his head. His spectacles, brimful of eyes to stare at me and the meadow, reflected cones of light above his toffee-buckled cheeks. He'd been alive 56 months, or perhaps a week more. Not 4, but rising 5. Around him in the field the cells of spring bubbled and doubled. Buds unbuttoned, shoot and stem shook out the creases from their frills, and every tree was swilled with green. It was the season after blossoming, before the forming of the fruit, not May, but rising June. And in the sky the dust dissected the tangential light, not day, but rising night, not now, but rising soon. The new buds push the old leaves from the bough. We drop our youth behind us like a boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. We never see the flower, but only the fruit in the flower. Never the fruit, but only the rot in the fruit. We look for the marriage bed in the baby's cradle. We look for the grave in the bed, not living, but rising dead. So my approach to commenting and preparing for commentary on any poem is to start with a reading of it. And again, before I'm going to make any assumptions or before I'm even going to try to come up with a thesis statement or an argument about this poem, I'm going to give it a close read and try to see what's there. The first thing that jumps out to me about this poem that really seems to jump off the page are the use of these enjambed lines. The not 4, but rising 5, the not May, but rising June, not day, but rising night, not now, but rising soon, not living, but rising dead. One thing I'm going to do is I start to annotate this poem, and with any commentary, I think it's a good idea to write on the poem. If you use highlighters or colored pencils, that's a good idea. You can do that. But I'm going to go through and make a note of this, and it's something, I'm just going to go through a number. The first thing I'm going to notice, the first thing that jumped out to me was this use of the physical nature of this poem where the lines are truly set on opposite sides of the page. I'm not sure what I'm going to make of that yet. I'm not sure what it means, but it's something that just jumps out at me very obviously from the beginning. Something else I noticed, and this is why I think it's important to read the poem out loud as part of your process. I noticed a lot of sounds, particularly in this part of the poem. Maybe you heard them as I was reading it. The use of bubbled and doubled, buds unbuttoned, that strong B and D sound here. Shoot and stem shook out the creases from their frills, that this strong alliteration of the S sound, shoot and shook. And then of course repeated in swilled and stem, that strong S sound. I'm not again sure what to make of that sound, but it was really apparent to me that the poet was using some auditory imagery and language here in this part of the poem as well. Something's going on with this stanza, and I'm not exactly sure what it is yet. I've seen the first stanza has a fairly traditional type of structure. It has a rhyme pattern to it: hair and stare, said and head. I'm going to note this rhyme pattern, right? Light and alive are not exact rhymes, but they have a similar long I sound, so I'm going to note that as kind of a half rhyme. And of course, more and for, so we kind of get a, maybe this is a CC and a DD. We get some rhyming couplets even here. There's less of the rhyme pattern here. I don't see it. Spring, shoot, frills, green, blossoming. There's a hint of rhyme here, but it's certainly not as, the rhyme is not as structured in the second stanza. And things really break down entirely. Back to this third stanza. I know at some point in my commentary I'm going to have to deal with this stanza. If it's that different, I think it must be important. Of course, as I get to this fourth stanza, and as I see this poem, I would divide it into four stanzas. 1, 2, this series of lines here I'm going to call kind of a third stanza, and this fourth stanza. As I get down to this fourth stanza, something else I think is very important that happens here. That the use of we is a common phrase that poets and writers in general use to connect with the reader. Not just I, not just me, but we. So I think that at this point in the poem, I need to be aware that the poet is making some type of generalization about the poem. So I've been dissecting this poem now for about 6.5 minutes, and it's time to start making some analysis of it. I'm going to pay a little bit of attention now to the guiding questions. I've given it kind of an initial read, and I covered those up beforehand, and I wanted to see now what the examiner has given me. I will always have some guiding questions with you for your oral commentary. What is the role of the little boy who is rising 5? I think I can answer that. And then how do repetition and other structural devices? And I've already noticed some of those. So what I'm doing in this process is the guiding questions aren't so much guiding me. I'm going to call these confirming questions. These confirm for me that what I've read and my reading of this poem is valid. The boy is obviously important, and I'm going to try to make sense of what he's doing in this poem. And then I've already noted some of the structural elements. I've already had some trouble with this one. I've noticed the rhyme pattern. I've noticed the 4 stanza structure. The first thing I noticed was this kind of swinging back and forth, the contrast of the right and left margins of the poem. And so I think I've already got some idea that this is important. So I'm going to call these confirming questions in my mind. And instead of using them to guide my reading, I'm actually going to use these questions probably to guide my commentary. My structure may be based on these. I might spend some time answering each of these questions as some of the subsets of my poem. Now that I've read the poem and thought about some of the structural elements, it's time to start focusing in on meaning. In other words, analysis needs to reveal what the poem is getting at. And I think at some point, and certainly an important part of my commentary, is going to be to make sense out of this. As I read this poem, it's about haste. And there seems to be a series of comments here about time and how people, whether they're young children, 5 or maybe 4 years old, almost 5, are in a haste or in a hurry to speed up time. How this is also reflected in nature, how we see the natural world around us always moving forward, never moving back. This particular stanza again talks about the movement of nature and maybe how we perceive nature, always moving forward. The sun is always moving. The dust dissected the tangential light, to me, is a very important line that I think I'm going to make reference to in my commentary. The sun is always moving. The light is always turning from light to shadow. It's never day. Night is always coming. It's never now. It's always rising soon. And then here at the end, I think that the poet is making a generalization about this phenomenon that children want to grow up faster. Nature seems to be always moving forward, or at least the way we perceive it is always what's next. Whenever it's spring, we're looking forward to summer. Whenever it's summer, we're looking forward to fall. I'm going to come back to this stanza again because to me it's problematic. But I think certainly in the end, the poet, maybe I should say the speaker, is commenting on this phenomenon. What is the result of all this? Because the new buds push the old leaves from the bow, change is always happening. What's the consequence of this for us as humans? We drop our youth behind us like a boy throwing away his toffee wrappers. Wasn't that image up here before? Let's see. Yes, the mention of the toffee buckled cheeks. Toffee's an odd image to use in a poem. We never see the flower, but only the fruit in the flower. We never see the fruit, but only the rot. Our attention, our focus is always on what's next, not what's now. And I think any poem is going to end with an important message, an important image. So I want to pay particular attention here to the end of the poem. We look for the marriage bed in the baby's cradle. Interesting image there, contrasting bed and cradle. We look for the grave in the bed. So we've gone from bed to cradle to grave, back to bed. And in that progression, it seems again to mention haste. We're always looking for what's next, not living but rising dead. Any poem that ends with the word dead, especially when it rhymes back with the pattern here of bed, is supposed to draw our attention, I believe. So I've kind of taken apart the poem. I've found some ideas that I think I can develop, and I've also found some questions that I still can't answer. But what I wanted to kind of draw out for you, and there are lots of ways to do this. I could have used color marking. I could have used a lot of different methods here. But I wanted to kind of give you a sense of a way into a poem. Again, keep in mind, you're going to recognize Blake. You're going to recognize the poem. You're probably going to recall, hopefully, you're going to recall the things we talked about with this poem in class. And now your task is to create a commentary, to create meaning out of what you've read here. And that's what we're going to do in the next video.